Hi guys! The last couple days I have been watching the Lord of the Rings movies again. I do that from time to time because I'm a really big fan of the series. So now you probably think I'm going to be painting a Lord of the Rings figure for you this week, which is actually not the case. I would like to at some point, but I simply just do not have access to any of the figures right now, so that'll just have to wait till another date. But to sort of get back to my point, because I've been watching the Lord of the Rings movies, I've been thinking a little bit about New Zealand, because, you know, that's where the movies are shot, and the scenery plays a huge role in the films. So when I was going through my collection of models, trying to find something to paint for you this week, I came across this Maori warrior by Eureka Miniatures. This is a little bit of a sort of unusual subject for a miniature, but he really appealed to me. It's a warrior, I believe. And it's not a very complex figure, but it's very nicely sculpted. And I think it's a great opportunity for me to show you, for example, how to paint a skin tone that I've never done before. And also, Maori, I believe, are pretty famous for their intricate tribal tattoos. So that's another really fun thing I would like to try out on this model. So I realize this is no Lord of the Rings video, but I think it should be just about as much fun. So as usual, I'm going to start off here with all the paint colors that you'll need for this model. And in this case, it does include everything you're going to need to paint his face and skin tone and all that, and of course what he's wearing. Alright, let's start out with the base coat on his skin here. It's obviously the most important part or most major part of the figure, so that's why we're going to be doing it first. I opted to go for a base coat here that is mostly going to be saddle brown so that we get a nice red tone in the skin, and I've lightened it here a little bit with some brown sand. I'm then going to follow that up with a really nice heavy wash of Reichland Flesh Shade from Citadel. You can see I'm really making sure that it goes on really thickly, but at the same time I'm going to be careful that I don't get any really heavy pooling on areas where I don't want it. My first highlight here is actually really straightforward. I'm just going to go ahead and take the base coat and reapply it over the whole model once that wash is dried. I'm doing this because I want to build up a very gradual, subtle skin tone on this guy. One reason for that is you can see he's has kind of a doughy build. Actually, he's got some nice muscles, but in some places they're just a little smoother and not super well defined. And when you've got that situation, it definitely pays off to be a little bit more sort of gradual and subtle with your highlighting. Next, I'm going to apply two more highlight layers where I just basically add a little bit more brown sand into my base mix each time and just go over the same areas and kind of blend it out. And at this point you can see I am starting to really define better this musculature and certain areas where I expect light to be hitting. I did want to talk a little bit real quick about sort of why I made the color choices here that I did. I did, some research. I looked at some modern Maori, how what their skin tone looks like, and I got the feeling that while they actually aren't really very dark skinned, they definitely have a very nice sort of tan complexion to them, but I would say that their skin has this very noticeable kind of red base to it. Like, so you see some people are kind of tan, but they've got more of a yellow cast to their skin, but the Maori seem to have a pretty reddish cast going on there. So that's why I put that saddle brown there in the base, because it's such a nice red-brown shade. And then brown sand is also a fairly warm color. It's a little bit more yellow, but especially when you mix it in with that more red-brown, it works really, really nicely. And and often the cast that you're going to get in a figure's skin is very much determined by sort of that base color that you start out with. So even afterwards, if you lighten it with sort of more yellow shades, you're still going to kind of keep that warmth in there. And here's a tip I kind of found useful. If you're struggling to figure out how to do a certain skin tone by looking at photographs of people, one way to do it, especially if we're talking about, you know, people from different parts of the world, see if you can find like cartoon character renditions of them. I mean, I know that sounds cheesy, but especially like, and I don't mean really like nasty, cliched cartoons, but you know, like good quality cartoons, like what Disney makes or something, because cartoons tend to be about sort of simplifying not just like how a model looks, but also simplifying the colors that are used in that model. So there's, as it happens, very recently there's that new Disney cartoon out about Polynesians or Hawaiians, and all Polynesians I think have a fairly sort of similar like skin tones going on. So I found that it was actually really, really helpful to look at some of the characters from that, and you could see it really kind of confirmed my idea or my suspicion that you wanted to use a red base in the skin tone on these models, because you could see that that's what they were kind of doing too on the cartoon characters, and I think the movie's called Moana. So, but again, you're seeing these very clear sort of red-brown sort of palette being used on their characters. Like with every model, it's important at some point to sort of deepen some of the really, really extreme shadows, and like with other models, I'm using Vallejo Black Red for this. So this is like areas between the fingers, his belly button, sort of around the eyes, nose, and mouth, just really building up those really high sort of contrasts in those areas. Once I've applied those really, really deep shadows, I'm now going to apply 3 additional highlight layers. These I'm going to make by taking some of the brown sand, and then I mix some of the saddle brown in there just to keep that red tone up. They're just not quite so much that it really darkens the color down. And then I'm going to sort of start progressively lightening each highlight by taking my trusty Iraqi sand and mixing that in. Iraqi sand and brown sand, as you know, on their own will make a pretty pale, more yellow tone, but because we got that saddle brown worked in there, that'll keep everything warm and kind of the way we want on the model. And as I said, Maori don't necessarily have a really, really dark skin tone at all, so feel free to highlight this pretty far. And I went with 3 layers here of this sort of extra lightening highlight, and you'll see it getting lighter and lighter, but I definitely did not go all the way up to just pure Iraqi sand. I don't want the skin tone to get that light, though if you look at people of sort of Maori ancestry, you will see there's quite a bit of variation, just like with everybody else. Some people have darker skin and some people have slightly lighter skin, and there's probably a certain number of people, you know, over the years who've mixed with Europeans and people from other places, and they probably also have like slightly lighter skin tones. So, you know, if you're going to be painting a lot of these guys for whatever reason, you might want to consider sort of varying the lightness of their complexion, having some guys be a little bit darker and then some guys just getting sort of, you know, a lighter treatment. Now the next step on the skin is something that I found myself doing a lot recently when I'm painting skin tones. It's something I haven't really talked about much because a lot of the skin tone painting I do kind of off camera these days for most sort of just normal European figures. But that is, I've been really trying to work in red tones by the use of a glaze. So I'm taking here Vallejo Flat Red and I'm mixing some Vallejo Glaze Medium into it to get a very thin transparent red shade, and I layer that very carefully over sort of select areas of the body. When you're only dealing with a face, then you're going to be focusing on places like the ears, the nose, sort of the chin and the cheeks, very sort of building up very carefully. But when you've got a whole body to work with here, you can think about putting in places like the fingers and toes, the knees and elbows, and then even down in some of the just more shaded areas on the figure, just to add a different dimension to the shadows. I found that this touch is a really great way to build up this extra realism in models that get this kind of variation in the skin tone. And the main thing you want to do when you're applying these sort of red coats is you're going to put it on and you may find that it looks too garish by itself. So usually what I do is I try to put the glaze on somewhere sort of halfway through the process, and then I'll often then layer some other just normal skin tones over top of it to kind of tone it down. But because of the transparency of the paint, some of that red is still going to be in there. It's going to kind of show through, and that's going to look really nice and natural because that's how you have, we have areas of our skin that are redder and where sort of more blood is flowing underneath the skin and it just shows through more. But I found this is just a really nice and actually a very easy way to just get a lot more sort of definition and sort of just interest in the look of your figure skin. Now, for this very last highlight I'm going to apply, I've actually slowed the camera down to just normal speed. And I did that because I've had several people asking recently for me to just show more, what's it look like when I'm just painting normally? Like, how does my blending kind of work in real time? So I'm going to make an effort more in future videos to at least have a few segments in there where I show some more sort of real-time painting, because I think that does help people, but I will try not to do it too much just because I know it is tedious and you don't necessarily want to watch me how I do that on the entire figure. But I thought this might be a good chance to do a little bit of that. My highest highlight here is basically Iraqi sand again, though I have added just a little bit of actually the flat red into it here to make it a little bit redder tone, so it'll work better just with my base and the overall skin tone. And you can see for this final highlight, I'm keeping it really thin and really subtle. I'm using it particularly here to really accent sort of muscles or bulges in the skin. So you can see, especially along the tops of muscles, I really like to run sort of a bright highlight. So then you've got kind of this extra highlight right next to sort of a dark sort of divide or sort of crease. And that really makes nice extra definition. When you get done with this step, you may actually find that some muscles look like they stand out a little bit too much. It's just too stark. If you get into that problem, it can then be useful to go back in the sort of a medium highlight color and very thin, and make it really thin, and then just sort of lightly apply that in an even coat over some shadow areas. And that'll just lighten them a little bit. You don't want to completely remove that shadow, but sometimes it can be helpful when you're painting skin and muscles like this to just, tone down some muscles, some sort of shadows on your muscles that just are too much, because, skin is actually pretty subtle looking. And you don't want it to, if you want it to look really nice, you don't want it to get too cartoonish or too silly looking. And you can see I'm going to definitely be using this color a lot, especially on his face, just to, as I said, to cover over some of that red that I applied, so he doesn't look like he's like a little bit too flushed, I guess. So the areas that I tend to not really cover over once I've applied the red, though, are his lips. I like to just apply several layers of the red paint there and just build that up, and then you don't really have to do anything else. You get a really nice, natural, sort of pinkish red lip without having to mix any special colors or anything, and it tends to just blend with the model a lot better usually than if you make a purpose lip color. I found that when you do that, that tends to look bad on, especially male figures. With women, you can make a natural shades, and that's okay, but it looks weird on guys. So this is a really good way to get some color in those lips, but keep it, pretty realistic and believable. So anyway, hopefully you found that sort of short
segment of real-time painting useful. So now I'm going to go ahead and speed it back up so that we can get this guy finished. All right, now it's tattoo time. I guess I should talk really quickly about tattoos on Maori people specifically here, so you understand what I'm doing. I had to do a bit of research on this, try to understand, what I should be doing and how and all that kind of stuff. Maori are famous for their sort of tattoos. The main thing that you need to know really when you're doing this is that the most important location for tattoos in this culture is going to be on the face. So they would prioritize applying tattoos on the face. If they didn't have them anywhere else, they would have them there. So if you're going to do this, you want to focus on that first. And men tended to tattoo their entire face, whereas women will have like just a small amount, maybe around their lips or chin. And then otherwise, if you want, you can put tattoos on other parts of the body, but traditionally applying tattoos in the Maori way is extremely time-consuming, expensive, and very, very painful. So it was not something that they were going to be doing. It's probably pretty rare that you're going to see someone that had their whole body covered from head to foot in tattoos. You want to have it on the face, and then beyond that, areas that you might see are on an arm or on the legs, maybe parts of the chest, but probably not just everywhere. And this guy, I opted to go for a pretty full facial tattoo and then just do some work on his right upper arm and kind of leave it at that, just so I don't kind of overdo it. And I have a nice skin tone here and I don't want to just cover him. The color that I'm using to do this is some Vallejo German Gray, and I've mixed just a little tiny bit of that blue paint in there. Not very much, just sort of because the inks they used were kind of a dark black blue. And I'm using a very tiny brush here. This is I think a 00 or 000. And the best way to figure out what to do with these tattoos, you really just want to get some references. Please just look at what Maori tattoos look like before you try to do this. And that'll give you some guidance when you're painting them. I'm going to highlight the tattoos a little bit. All I did here was I took that sort of German Gray blue base, and I then just took some of the Iraqi sand and I used that to lighten it up to just a higher gray shade, and applied that to sort of areas where there's sort of bulges in the muscles and stuff like that. And by using the Iraqi sand to lighten it, it sort of works better with the under skin tone, I guess. Another tip, I guess, when you're trying to figure out how to do these tattoos, if you're concerned about the design, sometimes if you look at pictures of real Maoris, you'll find that their tattoos are incredibly, incredibly intricate. They're not something you can realistically scale down very well, but if you look at Maori art, sculptures and stuff that they've done, like they do these wood carvings of people. Then they have these stylized tattoos that they'll put on the sculptures, and those tend to be a lot more simplified. So actually using those as a guide for then painting designs on your model, it actually is probably easier and probably works a lot better than trying to copy them from an actual real person, because yeah, some of that stuff, it's just incredible artisan sort of work that they do with these tattoos, but not something you can really necessarily reproduce in 28 millimeter. Maori, in terms of what they wear, you seem to see a lot of grass skirts, and I'm pretty sure that's what's represented here. Also, they sometimes wear clothing made out of feathers, it looks like, traditionally, but I think this is supposed to be grass here. That's how I'm going to be painting it anyway. I'm applying here just a base coat of Vallejo tan yellow, which I'm going to, make sure I apply several coats of, because it's kind of seen not coating super well over the black. In order to highlight the grass skirt, I'm first going to take that tan yellow and I'm going to mix some Vallejo ivory into it. And the best way to do this is to kind of, well, you can just paint the traditional way, use a small brush and carefully sort of highlight each segment of the grass skirt. But another way you can do this, and what I ended up doing in the end, is just take your paint, put it on the brush, and then wipe your brush off several times on the palette, and then sort of lightly apply over the surface. So basically over brushing. So I'm going to apply a layer like that, and then I'm going to go ahead and take just the pure Vallejo ivory and do the same thing, but then in sort of lesser areas. I ended up kind of deciding to focus the highlights here sort of around the top area of the skirt particularly, and also around the bottom area. So, just kind of keep overbrushing some higher and higher highlights. I actually, after I put the ivory on as an overbrush, I finished with a final sort of white overbrush as well, just to get it really bright looking. Once I've done the basic highlighting on that skirt here, you can see I'm applying that final white highlight. I grabbed some Citadel Seraphim Sepia wash, that's kind of that yellowish brown color, and I applied that all over everything. And that was really just to kind of help unify the colors here from the overbrushing, which tends to make things messy, and also to define sort of the shadow areas in the skirt a little bit more, because that was not very good. Once the wash is dry, you may want to go back in again and just re-highlight some areas with the white or cream, just to get them a little bit brighter again and sort of correct for any areas that the wash maybe made a little bit yellower than you'd like. All right, I'm going to be doing two things right here. I'm going to be painting his hair and adding some decoration to his grass skirt. His hair here, it's obviously black, so I'm just applying a black base coat to it. And then I'm going to use that black also to put decoration on the grass skirt. It seems that they just sort of maybe dyed the grass fibers in such a way that it results in kind of a pattern when they're wearing it. And I also made the waistband black, which really just helps tie everything together, and it makes a much nicer sort of definition between his skin and the grass. Again, photo reference will help you out a lot here. Look at some Maori traditional dress, and you will see that how they sort of decorate their grass skirts, what kind of patterns they use. I'm doing sort of a very simple sort of almost checker sort of pattern here around the middle of the skirt, and then just adding a couple simple stripes after that. This is nothing too hard, and it will definitely be a really nice way to make the whole figure a lot more interesting. You can leave your grass skirt just natural, but I think especially being as sort of the kind of sculpting it is, it will benefit a ton from adding some extra decoration. Once I had roughed out that pattern, I then went in and took some white, or you can use ivory, it doesn't matter, and lightened up the black that I just applied. I actually added in some German gray too, I believe. And then I just went ahead and highlighted the areas on his skirt a couple times with, I think, a couple layers of sort of increasingly light gray. And I used those same light gray shades also to very carefully add some highlights into his hair. And he's got sort of a bun on top of his head, and you'll want to apply some extra light highlights on that where it sort of curves, because when you've got hair like shiny hair like that sort of curves around something, where that curve is, the light really tends to reflect and you get an extra high highlight So you can go pretty light there. The rest of that hair, you want to be careful not to go too heavy with those highlights in most places, because you end up making his hair look gray, and that's not what you want. I did finish the hair off when I was done with a final sort of wash of Nuln Oil, just because that will help sort of bring everything together, and if you had some areas that maybe ended up too gray, that'll sort of tone that down and keep the sort of black look of the hair intact. Next, I'm going to be working on his spear. I started off by just doing a quick German camouflage black-brown base coat on the shaft, and then I moved onto that kind of tassel bit that he's got there. Now, the way this is sculpted, it looks like it could be the same material as the grass skirt, but I don't think it is. I looked, again, reference material is your friend, and it seems that these tassels on spears were often made out of feathers, and so like maybe kiwi feathers or something. I don't know the exact details, but so I'm base coating this now with saddle brown, and then I'm going to go ahead and mix some German camouflage black brown in there to get a darker shade. I'm going to try to create a little bit of a gradient, so you end up with sort of a darker brown towards the top of that tassel, and then towards the bottom, I'm actually mixing the brown sand in again and using that at the bottom. So you're going to end up with a darker brown at the top of the tassel, a lighter brown towards the bottom. And I even, towards the extreme bottom, I mixed in actually some white into that color, so you can get sort of these almost white looking feathers down towards the bottom. And there's also sort of a band around that top of that tassel, and I opted to highlight that extra too. Not necessarily because it would be, but I think when you've got that band, you need to really make sure there's a good definition there. So that's why I highlighted it higher here. Now for the spear point, I think it's that these are made out of stone usually. I don't know if it's obsidian or what it is, but it looks like these are carved from some kind of black stone, so that's what I'm doing here. I just base coated this with black, and then I went ahead with some German gray and applied some sort of global highlights to it, and then after that I just simply started mixing white in and applying sort of increasing highlights. I'm really using the color here to sort of define the carving on the base of that spear point, because there's definitely some sort of intricate work going on there, and it's a little, the sculpting is a little bit muddy, so I can help out here by adding this light gray paint to just kind of show that there's some kind of curved forms there, and also use a really light gray kind of to add an extra sort of shine to the edge of the cutting surfaces and stuff, because you tend to see that with like at least obsidian kind of black type stone if you carve it. I'm now going to do the spear shaft real quick. First, I'm going to go over it with a layer of Vallejo burnt umber. I'm leaving the sort of the side of the shaft facing his body the darkest, so it's nice. There's a clear point you need to highlight here. Then I'm mixing some of the saddle brown into my burnt umber for another highlight, so I'm kind of warming that brown up again. It looks nice, and it adds sort of additional unity to the color palette of this model. And then I just finished by taking some ivory or some white, it doesn't really matter, and lightening that color, that sort of final saddle brown color that I used, and applying that sort of as lightly and kind of in a fairly thin band on sort of one side of the spear, and that gives the wood kind of a shiny, sort of extra highlighted look on sort of one place. Now for this sort of net thing he's carrying, I admit I couldn't find any really good references for these things, so I just kind of guessed a little bit on the colors. I think my base here is a mixture of brown sand that I've lightened up with ivory, and with that first base coat, it's really just important that you get a really good solid coverage, and you spend some extra time really making sure you push and work that paint down into all the sort of sculpted grooves. And with so much deep relief, it's obvious that you want to do some more overbrushing here. So first I took, I think this is some ivory and Iraqi sand mixed together, and I'm overbrushing very carefully just all over the top surface of the net here. And then I took, I think again, and went over some more overbrushing with just pure ivory, and even finally a bit of white on there. And you can see like areas where I was sort of expect a little bit more light to hitting, I'm going a little heavier on those light shades. Then once I've got those highlights in there, I'm going to take some Citadel Agrix Earthshade wash, and I'm going to apply a pretty heavy wash here, and that's to make sure that that color really gets down in all those sort of holes in the net. And once it dries, then you're going to want to go back in probably and sort of reapply some of that overbrushing just to bring those highlights back out. You may even want to use some sort of detail brushwork here just to emphasize some specific strands of the net, you know, that you want to be a little bit lighter. And you can even apply some more levels of wash to certain sort of areas that are down in wrinkles and folds just to help make those look darker and define them a little bit better. Okay, so here is our finished Maori warrior, hunter, fisherman. I'm not sure exactly which of those he's supposed to represent, but, you know, just your typical Maori man, I guess, from a fairly earlier period. I assume because he's got a stone spear. This we're talking about, like, he's supposed to be kind of maybe like 18th century and probably not a lot newer than that. But anyway, I had a lot of fun with this guy. Obviously, I spent a lot of time on the skin tone. I'm really happy with how it looks. I think it's a really good representation, though, like I said earlier, you could go lighter or darker with that and still get a nice effect. I think this skin tone would also work pretty well for pretty much any other sort of Polynesian-type people you wanted to paint, so Hawaiians or people from any of the Pacific Islands, you could use a very similar skin tone for. I would be a little bit careful about converting this for, say, painting Native Americans or Mesoamericans. This skin tone, I think it's a little bit different. I think it may be a little more, I don't know, red-brown, I want to say, but again, it's going to vary a lot. So as always, if you're painting a skin tone you're not comfortable with, check a lot of reference material, and the more specific, the better. That's the best way to get the results you want. The tattoos, I think, were I had a lot of fun doing those as well. That's just kind of the right amount of detail work and not too much. It's one of those things that really kind of ties everything together and gives the model, you know, that personality and character that you want. And another thing like that, I think, is decorating the grass skirt. Again, that was super easy to do, but it's one of those things that just, you know, gives the model sort of that extra personality, that extra kind of touch, you know, that shows that you were kind of paying attention, you know, and, you know, really caring about what you did. Anyway, so yeah, this was a fun one. If you enjoyed watching, please like the video, share it. Of course, leave me comments, or also subscribe to the channel if you haven't got a chance to do so already. And that is all for this week, and I will see you next time.